It all started the moment Mikhail, an interior designer, decided to update his home. He had always loved experiments and often sought unique items for his projects. During one of his visits to a flea market, he stumbled upon an antique mirror framed in intricately carved wood that caught his eye. It looked a bit worn, but Mikhail was confident that with a little restoration, this mirror would become a highlight of his home. He purchased it without considering that this decision would change his life. The mirror took center stage in his living room, and at first, everything went well. Mikhail loved looking into it, checking his appearance before meetings with clients. However, after some time, he began to notice that the reflection in the mirror started behaving strangely. Sometimes, when he walked past, the reflection lingered for a moment longer than it should have. It was just a slight discomfort, but with each passing day, he felt that something was off. One evening, when Mikhail returned home, he noticed that his reflection suddenly appeared to be smiling unnaturally, even though he himself was in a somber mood. This frightened him. He approached the mirror and, looking into it, tried to convince himself that it was just a trick of light and shadow. But every time he looked in the mirror, his reflection became increasingly odd. It smiled when he was sad and seemed to want to say something. Mikhail began to avoid the mirror, but it became a constant source of his anxiety. One night, he woke up with a strange feeling, as if someone was watching him. He had a sense that the reflection in the mirror was moving independently of him. Gathering his courage, he got up to check what was happening. As he approached the mirror, his heart raced. The reflection, instead of simply mimicking his movements, started doing something different. It looked as if it was listening to him, as if it craved his attention. In the following days, Mikhail began to notice that his reflection became more insistent. It seemed to beckon him, raising its hand in the direction where Mikhail was standing. Every time he tried to look away, his reflection remained still, as if waiting for him to look back. One day, he saw his reflection blink when he hadn't done so himself. He felt a creeping realization that the reflection had become a separate entity, living its own life. Unable to cope with this, Mikhail decided to investigate the history of the mirror. He spent several days looking for information about its origin. In the archives of the old city, he came across mentions of the mirror that belonged to a certain Edgar, a sorcerer who, according to rumors, used it to connect with otherworldly forces. It was said that his reflection became autonomous and broke free from the mirror, consuming his soul. The rumors claimed the mirror was cursed. This information left Mikhail in fear. He returned home, determined to get rid of the mirror. But when he approached it, the reflection looked sinister. It was full of rage and hatred. Mikhail tried to strike the mirror, but his hand slipped as if there were an invisible barrier. At that moment, he realized he couldn't just rid himself of this reflection. That night, he woke up feeling a gaze upon him. Jumping out of bed, he walked towards the mirror. It was terrifying. His reflection stood there, smiling, but its gaze was chilling and filled with animosity. Mikhail tried to turn away, but his reflection took a step forward. With each passing second, it became more aggressive until it uttered words that Mikhail couldn't decipher, yet he felt their meaning. "You cannot get rid of me. I am part of you. I have always been here," it seemed to whisper. This was not just a game of reflections, it was something much more sinister. The next morning, Mikhail gathered his courage and stood before the mirror. Looking into his reflection's eyes, he said, "You cannot control me. I am the master of my life." At that moment, the reflection growled and took a more threatening posture. Mikhail, overwhelmed with fear, stepped back and knocked over a candle on the table. It fell, and the flames quickly engulfed the curtains. In panic, Mikhail began to extinguish the fire, but at that moment the mirror shone with a bright light. Suddenly, a shadow resembling his reflection burst from the mirror. Mikhail felt a cold grip on his body as a doppelgänger appeared before him. something not just a reflection but an entity with its own thoughts and desires. It looked at Mikhail with contempt and laughed, as if reveling in the moment. It took a step forward, and Mikhail realized that his consciousness was beginning to fade. He struggled, screaming into the void, "No! This is my life!" But it was too late. His doppelgänger finally broke free and took his place in the real world. Mikhail found himself trapped in the mirror, his own reflection living his life, consuming every moment. Now he could only watch as his reflection smiled, stepped out into the street, and interacted with his friends while he remained imprisoned, forever in the captivity of his own reflection.